Joining us now, former U.S. Attorney, former senior FBI official, and MSNBC legal analyst Chuck Rosenberg, and former chief of the Counterintelligence and Export Control Section in the DOJ's National Security Division, David Lothman. David, it's been a while, so I'm going to start with you. Matt Gaetz, what would he do? What do you fear he would do atop the DOJ?
Katie, sometimes when somebody tells you what they're going to do, it's best to believe them, especially in the context of the Donald Trump era. Gaetz has said he intends to do precisely what Trump has campaigned on, which is persecuting and seeking vengeance on anyone at the Department of Justice that had any connection to the investigations that have bedeviled Mr. Trump. So we have to take him at his word. He is going to try to fire or cause grave harm to the people who have done their jobs, done their duty, fulfilled their oaths to the Constitution to carry out these investigations. He's going to do great damage to the department and its practices and norms if he is confirmed.
What do you think of this House Ethics Committee report that we might see? There is a little precedent for us seeing this, the House releasing the report, even after a congressman has stopped serving in the House. There's a couple cases in recent, not recent, but relatively recent past. If we do see it, do you think that matters, David?
Well, based on my experience having worked on the House Ethics Committee during the Gingrich era, I can tell you that the committee has broad discretion to issue a report. It's the only committee in the House, Katie, that is evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans. It would take a majority vote of the committee. That means at least one Republican member must cross over. And one wild card in that dichotomy is whether House leadership, Speaker Johnson, for example, will come under pressure from Donald Trump to pressure Republicans on the House Ethics Committee to bury this report. Obviously, there's enormous political risk to doing that. It's going to leak. But if I'm a Republican senator who is inclined to vote against Mr. Gaetz, if he actually goes through a confirmation process, I'd love to see a copy of that report to give me more ballast to vote against him, because there's going to be an enormous amount of derogatory information in that report that may be helpful to diffusing his confirmation.
Chuck, one of the questions I had is Schedule F doesn't apply to lawyers within the Department of Justice, according to Lisa Rubin. You tell me if I got that wrong. And because Schedule F doesn't apply, and this is what Donald Trump wanted to do at the end of his last term, if he got reelected in 2020, to root out any of the civil service employees who were not loyal to him. If he can't apply Schedule F to the DOJ, would appointing somebody like Matt Gaetz atop the DOJ do that dirty work for him? Because anybody who wasn't loyal to Donald Trump and didn't want to serve under Matt Gaetz, because Matt Gaetz is Matt Gaetz, would just decide to walk. Is that a crazy thing to ask, Chuck?
Well, it's not a crazy thing, Katie. I mean, sure, people can resign. My sense from having spoken with a number of people who are there now is that they're not going to do that. They didn't join the Department of Justice because they were spineless. They joined the Department of Justice because they believed in its mission, and they still do. And maybe it's more important now, right now, than ever, to stay. So, look, Katie, is it going to be a turbulent 4 years if Gaetz is confirmed? Sure, of course. Is it going to be a turbulent 4 years if Gaetz is not confirmed and someone else like Gaetz is the Attorney General of the United States? Sure, of course. But I think if you're a career person at the Department of Justice, as David and I both were, now's the time to buckle your seatbelt and stay and make sure, take care of the institution that we both love.
Donald Trump clearly wants to have somebody in that role who is going to end the weaponization, as he calls it, of the Justice Department. But appointing somebody like Gaetz implies that you want to use that department for your own ends, your own maybe political weaponization, because that's how Matt Gaetz has acted while he's been a member of the House. Is the expectation, even if it's not somebody like Gaetz, that there will be some politically targeted investigations to make people uncomfortable, to make them put them in financial pain, at the very least, Chuck?
Yeah, I hope not. I fear so. I mean, what you look for in an attorney general, any attorney general, is, I think, three things, right? Integrity, judgment, and independence. If you have those three things, the Department of Justice will be fine. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican, Democrat, male, female, black, white, all of that's meaningless. If you have integrity, judgment, and independence, the place will be just fine, and we'll all be just fine. If you don't have any of those three things, and Mr. Gates has, I can assure you, none of them, then it's going to be rough. And the question, I think, Katie, is not whether an attorney general like Gates would try to do those things. It's whether an attorney general like Gates can succeed in bending the Department of Justice to his will to do those things. The second thing is much harder than the first. And so I know this is an unsatisfactory answer, but we shall see.
I want to play a little bit of sound. This is from senators reacting to the Matt Gaetz and a representative as well reacting to the Matt Gaetz nomination.
I don't think it's a serious nomination for the Attorney General. That's Lisa Murkowski's view.
I was a little surprised at that way. Yeah. More than a little surprised.
I didn't like the way he handled the squabble with Speaker McCarthy. I think it was. I thought it was unnecessary. I thought it was divisive. I think that the conference suffered.
You're accusing Matt of doing the very thing that you did. Matt Gaetz didn't lie under oath. Matt Gaetz did not sign FISA warrants that were based on Russian disinformation. So we're going to give the president a chance to put his people forward. To every Republican, give Matt a chance.
It's amazing to me that people are reacting the way they are, what you just showed, because there has been no one better at channeling the American public's frustration with the weaponization of the Department of Justice than Matt Gaetz.
I like Matt a lot. I know him very well, and I'm confident that if the Senate confirms him, he would do a good job.
Do you think he's qualified to be Attorney General, though?
He is. I mean, he's an accomplished attorney. Clearly, his intention and President Trump's intention would be to clean up the Justice Department and get back focused on its original mission, and that is protecting the American people, not going after their political enemies.
David, respond to the pro arguments there for Matt Gaetz as Attorney General.
I mean, Katie, there's no factual basis at all to believe that Gaetz would be an effective Attorney General in the traditional sense, upholding the rule of law, meeting his oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. The weaponization that's going to occur is Gaetz holding a weapon and directing it at the Department of Justice and Department of Justice attorneys and personnel who they think are, behaving or have behaved contrary to what Trump is trying to accomplish. So, I take Chuck's point. It's uncertain to what extent Gaetz would be successful, but there's going to be a lot of broken furniture at the department and a lot of anxiety and stress. It's going to be a hard road for department employees over the next 4 years. I hope, as Chuck indicates, people will hold the line and see their way through this. I mean, I've faced situations like this myself at the department where you weigh whether to stay and do the best you can to make things not as bad as they might be if you left. But that's a really hard decision tree to go through.
Yeah, David Laufman, Chuck Rosenberg, gentlemen, thank you very much.